Okay, for today's topic discussion, I wanted to do something that's very contemporary and happening right now, and it has to do with the COVID-19, the coronavirus, and kind of how it's affected, especially within the Christian community and the evangelical community here in America, where we have people on across the spectrum, right? We have people saying the government is using this virus as a pretext or like a trial run to take away our freedoms, our liberties, whether that's the right to assemble, right to free speech. I mean, we've seen censorship, right, in videos, in the news, YouTube, where people that aren't going with the party line or the current trends are not being allowed to have their message out. And then we have people on the other end of the spectrum that see, as Christians, we of all people should be supporting the government at this time out of love for and care for our neighbors, for the weakest among us. And it's the way of the cross to lay down some of our personal rights and privileges and freedoms out of love for the other, not out of fear, but out of love. And so we have this huge spectrum. And if you've been on social media or on the news or simply talked to another human being, maybe in your own family, even families are divided. I know mine is. And how can we communicate our position or what we believe the Holy Spirit is speaking into our lives through his word or through our time of meditation with him? And then how should we relate to those around us, both in faith and without? And so David, we talked a little bit earlier, and I want David to share his perspective first, and then I'll let someone else give another perspective. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Fred. So I guess my perspective is just that I think we should all take, our standard precautions to, not spread any of the virus, and just normal washing of the hands and keeping the distance if that's what it takes. But I think it's important to, like, when it comes to government and what they're mandating, is to really kind of set aside, because I feel like a lot of this has just been brought apart with the partisan politics aspect in it. Like when we see some of the actual rates of the death rate and how actually hospitals are incentivized to count deaths as COVID deaths because they receive more funding in that way. A lot of the deaths that are, considered COVID are not confirmed COVID. So it gives us an idea of, hey, this thing is really far more deadly than what it really is. And so now, in the same sense, there are people that have died of this virus, right? And so and the majority is older folk or people with underlying conditions, and it's not to say that they have any less of value. I think we ought to be able to do what we can to protect them, but to the point of shutting down our economy, and there's so many families and people that just have so many but the majority of businesses in our country are small businesses, and many of them are considered by the government non-essential. And so in that sense, I think there is a middle ground where both sides can come together. And I think to put that like into words, I think it would be being able to have the quarantine for the sick, and if you have underlying conditions or there's older folk, to allow them to have them stay home and have precautions, but for the rest of society to be able to continue to move forward. Because the effects of this shutdown could be far greater than what anything of this virus could have happened. And just one more thing is, I think that with the recent studies there was a couple of studies from the USC saying about some antibodies, and that the actual infection rate was far higher, about 55% higher than what we expected when the initial models came out. And so understanding that really drops the death rate, and it really shows that this virus is not as deadly as what we all thought when we initially thought 2 million Americans were going to be killed by this if we didn't flatten this curve. And then I guess the other aspect is just when it comes to the flattening of the curve, the whole idea of the quarantine was to, be able to save the medical or the healthcare system, because we didn't have enough beds. If it would have gotten really big, we didn't have enough beds, and we see in New York that they're empty. Many healthcare professionals have been furloughed because they've canceled a lot of surgeries or a lot of other like healthcare. What do you call it? Like other surgeries, basically that are considered non-essential because it's only COVID that we're working on. But then there's empty beds, there's empty hospitals, there's people that have been furloughed, and so at what point what exactly are we still saving the healthcare system from? If there's a lot of I guess to say that it has been flattened, there is no more need for that, in my opinion. So.
Okay, thank you, David. And so David's taken more of what I would consider a right of center approach. I do appreciate that David is taking the virus seriously. He's not just saying it's a hoax. It's not just a clever way to get rid of Trump or destroy the economy. And so I appreciate that. The talking point, of course, the soundbite piece is where the cure becomes worse than the disease, right? And that was one of Trump's favorite things to trot out. And it's an interesting question, right? Are our methods of trying to contain and protect actually doing more harm than good? And this is where it gets really difficult from a human perspective, because we do not know the future, right? We have models, we have predictions, but that's all they are. They're not reality, and we don't know until things happen. So we can have great intentions, we can put in our efforts, but we don't know what would have happened in America, right, if we wouldn't have done such an extreme shutdown. It could have been much worse, but we don't know. And the same thing with people that want to open up the economy because they're afraid of what will happen if we don't. Once again, we're only going to know the results of the scenario we pick. We won't know what would have happened with the one we didn't pick. And so it's very difficult, especially if you're trying to do a utilitarian ethic, which I hope none of you are for this one. But you can already hear it in the voices of many Americans, Christian and non-Christian alike. They're counting the cost, right? The measure. And unfortunately, it's not just in lives, it's in capital, it's in money, it's in wealth, it's in our way of life. And I just think that's a fascinating thing to pit against each other in our society, our most vulnerable versus our economy. But David made a fair point. In a broken economy, there could be a lot of collateral damage. We talked about domestic violence, suicide, depression, anxiety, the health issues that come with that. So I think that was fair, David, that it's not just the virus, but the shutting down does have other effects, and not just economic effects, but mental health and safety effects. All right, I want to give someone else a chance to talk. I'm especially curious if one of you is coming from a more leftist position. I thought David I'd put him to the right, not in the center, but I don't think crazy right, but moderate right. How's that, David? Are you comfortable with moderate right?
That's fine. Yeah, I am comfortable.
Not that we're labeling anyone, but do we have any moderate lefts in here?
Probably
Daria.
me. Yeah. Well, with the things that you said, David, I have not, well, to be quite honest, first off, I'm biased because my situation in this pandemic is like the best spot I could be in because I don't have a family of my own that depends on me. My dad is still able to work his good job and bring in a good income. We're being able to get stuff delivered. And then I don't have really any expenses right now since I'm still living at home. I have not moved out, and I still have like a lifestyle because I'm still a student for the next few days. And so I have purpose, I have safety, and I have money that can provide for me, and I'm really grateful for that. But I realize that not everybody has that. So amongst this pandemic, my biggest concern is protecting my family in the ways that I can, of making sure no COVID gets in this house, because I do have parents who are a little bit older than most parents. My dad just turned 67, and so just because of their age, they're considered a higher risk. So we've been disinfecting all the groceries that come in and making sure to keep social distance, and I've really embraced my introvert side. I'm very proud of myself. But I realized that that's not everybody's case, and if I had a family that financially depended on me, I'm sure I'd be saying different things. But it's hard when it comes to trying to find the truth about situations these days. I haven't heard that hospitals and the whole funding thing. What is that about? Like, if they report more COVID deaths, they get more funding?
Yeah, because there's resources by Congress and others that have been targeted because of this crisis, and it's kind of, in some ways, it's pulling back the veil of our healthcare system too. I mean, as you see, medicine in this country is very much for profit, and so hospitals have done a great job, if you want to look at it from an administrative point of view, of looking at the needs of their community, how many beds they're going to need, how many specialists, and you want to keep those beds full, right? Because each bed is worth so much money. And I'm not trying to be crass and say they don't care about people or health or any of that, but there definitely is an huge economic value of healthcare in this country. Mm-hmm. So when because of the COVID and trying to make sure they could keep parts of the hospital safe, right? And so that wasn't spreading to other wards and other things, they ended non-essential surgeries and procedures. So what's ended up happening is, instead of our hospitals being overwhelmed, some doctors and nurses have actually been furloughed. Now, it depends, of course, which city, which place. Some places like New York City, New Jersey, they're having lots of issues. But other, especially more rural places, because of the general pronouncement. I have a friend who's a nurse up in Humboldt, and just called him yesterday or a couple days ago, and he was like, yeah, I'm home. It's so slow, they ask us to come home, because in that county there's very few cases, but because of the state order on no elective surgeries, they're really slow. And so it does seem like we're getting mixed messages, but once again, it's because we're in this really weird dynamic time.
Yeah.
About a very new sort of event. But it is exposing things about our system.
Yeah.
Good, bad, news.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Fran.
That's all I want to say.
Okay. I think personally, it wouldn't be wise to say that either one or the other is happening. I think I have a hunch that probably both is happening in some places. What?
You want your postmodern both and.
I do. I love my postmodern both and. It covers all of it, but because technically, if you have a majority of this but still have one of this, you still got both. But anyway, I really do think that yes, there have been a lot of like healthcare workers that have been furloughed. Like, I remember, like, my dad went in for like a blood test, and he asked the phlebotomist there, like, oh, like, hey, like, how are you guys doing? You getting your hours? And they thought it was, the phlebotomist said, like, no, like, there's nobody coming in. It's so slow. They're doing what they can, like, on the front lines and Palomar and all that, but the rest of us are just, just hanging out, not getting a lot of hours. So I think that sort of situation is definitely happening, but I don't think it'd be wise to say that that's the situation everywhere. That I think there are still overwhelmed hospitals and all that. And really the point is to make sure we don't reach that point of overwhelming the healthcare system and making sure that, we don't have to dig mass graves and get the refrigerated trucks like they were in New York. I saw it on 60 Minutes. I couldn't watch the the whole thing a few weeks back. My dad was watching it and I couldn't watch it because they were showing footage of, getting ready for people to die in large amounts. And I hope they didn't have to use that. I don't know what came of it, but I don't want to get anywhere near that point,
Sure. Well, Daria, the points I really appreciated, and I think I need to more and more consider is you were really good about talking about you're in a really good situation. And that does affect how you relate to this particular issue. And I think anyone being honest, that's part of critical thinking, right? We have to look at our own biases. And it's the same for me. My life has changed very little. I'm still able to do my job. I can still pay rent. I had steak for dinner last night. I'm actually getting to spend quality time with my family. And it's been good. But it could just as easily and turn out very bad. I could end up, before it's all said and done, losing several family members. And so for me, it's that balance to be aware and thankful how good I have it, but to really honor those who are in a weaker place or who do have fears or concerns. And somehow I'm trying to navigate this with a lot of my more conservative friends who are seeing this more as like a freedom and a rights issue or an American liberty issue as opposed to like a control issue. And that's so interesting to me because that didn't even come up onto my personal radar because I'm so focused on the care end of the spectrum that I'm not thinking so much on the liberty end. But I don't want to say those folks, some of them are my friends, former students, colleagues, bosses. I don't want to just dismiss their concern about American liberties and freedoms, but it can become very difficult to navigate, right?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like government control, it's interesting because many people have the concern that, this is an excuse for them to like really like control us and all that. But I mean, a lot of other countries around the world are also doing this. So to say it's just America, I think is, not true. But I understand people's concern about liberty. But also, like, if you look at where the dollars are going, the government doesn't gain by us staying home, I don't think, in terms of wealth. Because if we're not outspending money, that's not good, right?
No. It's not a wealth issue, it's a control of the population issue.
But usually control follows money. So that's where I'm like, I don't know.
That's true. I see you've been taking your deconstruction theory classes, right? And critical theory classes. Follow the money. Who stands to profit from what's happening?
I would probably I would agree with Daria that she says there's definitely money is followed by control, or vice versa. But I would say that I think that in a sense, obviously coming from my perspective, and like, I do see it like Freddie, how you're saying it, you have some friends that see it more on the liberty side. I think I do see it more on that side too. Not to say that I don't see it on the care side, but I think that there can be a benefit for politicians that are looking to gain control by having us stay home, because if you look at it in the long run, the more that we have an economic situation like this where we have almost half of Americans without a job, it brings up a need for more of a larger welfare state. And so in that sense, I guess it would become an increase in taxes for the people who are working, and then I guess more money, right, for the government to push, bigger government initiatives and welfare plans, which I think are, I mean, without going into too much, I don't know. I don't agree with having so much of the government doing that. That's more of the church, but yeah.
That's true. I didn't consider that.
One of my former students did an interesting post I woke up to this morning, and he said, I'm not using this term to be crude,
Oh boy.
but he thought it really fit the situation. And the phrase he rolled out was called fear porn. And I actually love it. And it's this idea, kind of like pornography, like how addictive it can be, right? And how people want more and more graphic or extreme, like the law of diminishing returns. Like you need more and more to get the same thrill. The same thing with the fear mongering. What might have scared you yesterday, you needed something a little bit scarier today to give you the same amount of fear. And so the idea was, he was specifically targeting the media, but how it's become like this fear-feeding frenzy, and the networks are vying for who can have the most shocking story, right? Or if you're going through your social media or your news feeds, the clickbait, like which is the most horrific story of the day is going to capture our attention. And I thought it was super interesting. And I confirmed what he was saying, but he was only pointing out the fear mongering from the left. Like, oh, it's going to kill us all. It's another Black Death. And I said, have you considered the fear mongering from the right? Because they have a different type of fear mongering. Fear of losing our First and Second Amendment rights, fear of losing our freedom to worship or assemble together as believers, fear of the government taking over and having a socialist or communist government. This is from one of our former colleagues. I'm not going to name names, but this was his meme yesterday. This thing is meant to collapse the economy, get rid of Trump, bring in socialized medicine, divide and chip away everybody, and eventually a new world order. And this is from someone I respect as a Christian, a believer and all that, but I don't see how you can call fear-mongering on the left and give a pass. To me, this is fear-mongering on the right. And if I'm out of line here, I'd love to be corrected or challenged.
I think you put up a fair point, Fred. I think that yes, you can see how either side's going to have, there's everybody's bias, and everybody has their own opinion. And I think that you do put up a good point. But where I guess I would just counterpoint is just in the sense of I'd bring it back to, like, if you look at the seriousness of the virus, and when we see, some media outlets saying that, that was actually, I think it was Governor Cuomo who said I'm not sure if it was him, so I'm actually not going to put his name up. There was a governor that I was listening to, and he said that the virus is death, because they had asked him, like, at what point do you think that the cure is more deadly than the virus? And he says no. He says the virus is death, and it's like, well, when you really look at it, it's not necessarily, that's not the truth, in the sense that a lot of people have gotten this, and either they're asymptomatic or they have had a few symptoms. They were at home for a couple of days, but they were not to the point of, but then there are the people that have gotten it to that, really
but
extreme where they've had
hyperbole is fun, right? And when we got our blood up, when we got our blood up and we're feeling all agitated, hyperbole is a fun debate technique, right? Or rhetoric technique. But I don't think it's helpful if you're trying to build a bridge, or it's just a way to inflame and pour fuel on the fire. And I had another former person from my church, solid believer, super intelligent guy. He lives up, works in social media, Silicon Valley. And he ventured into this. He was very conservative. He's much aligned with you, David, in the things you've said. But also very critical thinker. He wrote a post that said, why do some well-meaning people favor authoritarianism? And so he wrote a really nice thing trying to explain the benefits of having the government or an authority looking out for you, kind of like a nanny state or like the benevolent dictator, right? That sort of motif. And so I wrote to him and I said, if you're going to try to do a critical understanding of another point of view, you need to start by using their own language, right? I don't know of anyone on the left who is saying, oh, please let us live under more authoritarianism, right? There might be a few out there, but that's certainly not what I want. My focus isn't on more authority and control. It's on safety and care of the other. And so I said, you have to start. It would be like if you were trying to take, if I wanted to take a pro-choice position, I wouldn't start by saying, why would some well-meaning people be into killing babies, right? That right off the bat, I'm showing my colors by how I've worded the conversation. So for that empath piece, we need to really enter. And I said, why don't you rephrase it? I said, I was being a little snarky. I said, is your next piece going to be, how can some well-meaning people or good-intentioned people seem to have total disregard for their fellow man? Do you see how unfair that is, right, from the other point of view?
Right. And I think, okay, when you said that it's not fair or it's not beneficial in the sense of building a bridge, I would definitely agree with that statement. And I think, that I would definitely agree with what you said there. But I guess this is kind of a little bit off of the topic, but I think it was worthy to mention. It's still on the topic, just a little bit veering off. But in this whole idea of the coronavirus, I have my political, or like I guess like my views of how the government ought to act during this time. I've given a lot of thought into, just as a Christian, what exactly do I think of the virus? Like, how do I see God in all this? How do I see, like, obviously His sovereignty and His hand during the pandemic? And I think that one of the things that I can actually say, as I know, Fred, I heard you say that, you said that this time has not been very much of a different thing for you, but it's, you've been able to really enjoy it. And I think on my end, these past couple, 2 months or so, I have been really challenged in the sense of my faith and like how God is going to provide for me, right? With how school was going, and then just because my job was correlated to the school, and but I can thankfully say that throughout this whole time, God was, regardless of how everyone was losing jobs and how crazy and volatile everything was, I was able to understand that nothing changes for a Christian when you're in the highs or the lows, because you always ought to be looking to God for your, your provision, your safety, and your just your day-to-day things. And I think before the pandemic happened, I was, seeing my safety in a paycheck or in just how things were steady in my plan that I had. And then when something to this magnitude disrupts not only my own life, my state, my country, or my whole world that I'm in, like, it's, that moment that I was in, that everyone else was in, we were all, shaken up. And I think as Christians, one of the things that I've been mentioning to people around me, and I think as Christians, it shouldn't have changed it shouldn't have changed much for us, because we always should be looking to God for our provision in that. And that was like the main thing that I was able to learn through. And I have been learning through this time, is that, before the virus, while, I had a steady paycheck and whatnot, that was still a gift that God was providing, you know, and He provides in many different ways. So I think the pandemic has given us an opportunity to even share with others in different ways where they might not have seen before. Yes. They might not have been as open. And I think we ought not, as Christians, like, this is the time, you know, because a lot of people are considering death or thinking of it a lot more, whereas before they might have been apathetic or just putting it off, you know, on the back of your mind.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, David, too. And especially I want to be sympathetic and as empathetic as I can be to those who are underemployed or can't pay their rent or can't get food or those sorts of things. I'm not trying to just dismiss it and tell them to just suck it up and all that. I don't. I feel a lot of empathy. And certainly if you guys are in need or know people in need, I can't finance or bankroll everyone, but I certainly can help to a degree, or I could help point you to where we could get people help. So I want you to be aware of that. But we do have to keep that in mind, right? Just like that chapel talk I gave you, just because it isn't broken for us doesn't mean it's not broken for someone else. And whether that's a job or whether that's someone that's sick, right? And so on both ends of the spectrum, we need to not just think of our own, but on the well-being of others. And that's a very biblical concept. That it's not just about us, our needs, our kairos, our desires, our freedoms, but we're going through 1 John, and John says that is a sign of our love, that if we say we love Christ, like Christ, we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. And he's not saying we need to go out and be crucified, but in a sense, it's a daily laying down of our lives, of our rights, of our ego, of our flesh, of our desires. It's a hard teaching, people, but the way of the cross is we are meant to be poured out into the world. We are going to be instruments of God's mercy to the world, I believe, if we are in the Spirit. But that's going to cost you your very lives. At least that's my teaching on the dead have no need of ethics. It's not our lives anymore. It's not our rights. It's not our freedoms. It's not those things. And this would be my encouragement to people on left and right. For those of you that are concerned about your rights and privileges as an American, you see this as God's country and God's blessing upon us, and we need to honor God. We need to worship. We need to protect those hard-fought liberties. I'm not opposed to that ideology. All I would ask is that you make sure to do this in the Spirit and in love, right? And I think you can stand up for your civil rights and liberties and even your economic values and concerns in a spiritual, loving way. Not railing, not being in people's faces or on the courthouse steps with your AK semi-automatic. You know, these sorts of things, I don't think it's that difficult. When you look at these people that are protesting, are they protesting in the flesh or in the spirit? And I think you could do both. And the same thing with those that are stayed at home, right? You can stay at home out of love and compassion in the spirit, or out of fear and paranoia. And both, whether you stay at home or whether you protest, needs to be done in the spirit and not through your own flesh, not for your own ego, not your own fears or your own rights. And would anyone like to dispute that?
Valentina's been wanting to say something for a while.
Come on, Valentina.
I have multiple things to say because you guys mentioned different topics.
Go for it.
Hopefully I don't forget them. So regarding this one, I totally agree with David that answering your question, how a Christian how to behave in this situation, nothing should really change in the Christian's life. We trust the Lord always, no matter when everything is going well, we give thanks, and when everything is not going well, we still trust Him just as much. So in that, obviously, like, we still have to, like you mentioned in another lecture, how the difference between, we always fight with the flesh, basically. There is still like temptations to just despair and stuff like that, but like wanting to make our own plans and trust on the paycheck, like David said, but at the end of it, we always need to pray that the Valentina who trusts in the Lord, is the one living the day. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, that's Valentina I want to hang out with.
me too. but so I have to say, like, agreeing with Daria said, that it also depends on what you face, like what you think. It's very much influenced by like how the situation affected you personally. So I'm
Right.
sure that my opinion is different from someone who lost the job and has the family to take care of. And in that sense, I totally agree with you that we need to take this with empathy. Like, if you want to, have arguments in the spirit, you're welcome to do that. But that's also the reason why I didn't want to. Yeah, on one side, it's a good moment, good period for Christians to go out there and like share the gospel. But on the other side, you need to be very empathetic of what people are going through.
Yes.
So that's for sure. Me personally, I had a lot of plans and expectations, like destroyed. So that was very humbling for me, and I'm thankful on one sense, because those things don't matter as much. Regarding what you said about your former student talking about fear, I totally agree with that, and maybe my opinion is influenced by what I'm experiencing in Italy, like what my family is experiencing. A friend of mine actually had the chance to send out a survey regarding fear and the situation with the COVID going on, like what's going on. People from the South affirm to be more fearful regarding the situation in the North, when the virus is much more spread out in the North. So you can tell that like people are just fearful of the unknown. I thought that was super interesting. And regarding what you said, like what people, like how should we face this? I think that every state is a different story, because I was listening to the news yesterday. New York is far away from reopening, while California might be opening soon. Obviously, it needs to be a gradual process, and I think people can't just like reopen and go back to regular life. Like, I think they should still take precautions. Like, if you want to reopen your store, you better always wear the mask and gloves and all this kind of stuff. I'm not necessarily against gradually reopening based on the situation that your state is facing, but I'm honestly, like, I don't agree. I also don't agree with what the media are saying, because they always have been like attracted to the war stories. They just want to, have people like going around like scared and all. So I personally am trying to stop listening to the news, because after the first couple of days where I wanted to be informed, they just kept going over and over again. Like, and again, I'm respectful towards those people who are suffering and lost lives. And believe me, in Italy, it's been awful. But on the other side, I think these political tensions, what do you think regarding, political debates between right and left, are not needed right now. They're not needed in Italy, and I think they're not needed in USA either. Like, no matter what your, perspective is, political party, I think we are all scared to some level, especially non-Christians, and we are all facing the same thing, and we should not lose our time on, how is this affecting right or left. And last thing, again, I'm all saying this is my opinion. I don't want to be disrespectful, but I heard, like, what I'm hearing regarding government, how do you say, like, touching the freedom of religion, freedom of, like touching this kind of topic. I honestly don't think this is true. Like, my church personally, my pastor said, we're doing this to take precautions and to have our elders being safe. The day that they want to reopen, they're going to reopen, hopefully taking the decision that it's best for the body. But I don't think the government is, touching those kind of freedoms, because it's up to our church deciding when they're going to reopen, and hopefully they do it thinking about our safety. I respect the history of fights regarding religious freedom, but that was, I think, a different story, you know? That's pretty much it.
Let me piggy tail on that, Valentina. And my recommendation, I just find it so odd that I, of all people, would be bringing up Romans 13. Because I've always been on the other end of the spectrum, right? It just, we're free in Christ and all this liberty. But this is what I've started to do when some of my more to the right friends are like impugning nefarious intention on the government. Okay? And I'm just asking them gently, how do you navigate Romans 13? This idea of God is the ultimate authority, but any authority in our life is placed there by God. And I used to argue with Witten about this all the time, and pointed out to me, he said, do you understand who the authority was at the time Paul wrote that? And you guys probably know this, you're educated. It was Nero. And I don't care what you think about Trump or Obama or Clinton or Newsom or Como. They ain't no Nero.
Yeah.
Not even groups. And Paul is giving this idea to be submissive to this government that you could call it antichrist to a degree. Now, if you remember when we talked about this earlier under civil disobedience, the qualifier in Romans 13 is submission is an attitude of the heart and is categorical. It is how we show honor to God by being submissive to those, whether that's our teacher, our parent, our governor, our president. We are to be submissive. It's an attitude of the heart. But obedience is conditional on what the authority is asking us to do. And if they are asking us to do something that violates God's commands, then we are to submissively disobey. Now, that's my conviction. That's my belief. But that's how I sit with Romans 13. So as long as the government, like I ride a motorcycle, I do not like helmets. But in California, if I want to comply with the law, I need to put on a helmet. Now, you could say, well, that's just utilitarian, Fred, because you don't want to get a ticket and a fine. Well, no, I do it not because of the fine, but because I'm submitting to my Father, to God. And I'm doing that by submitting to the laws of my state on putting a helmet on my head, because that doesn't violate my freedom in Christ or obedience to the Father. Same with the seatbelt or the speeding laws. The government is not asking me to do something illegal. In fact, their intention is to save life, to protect the general population by those rules. And that's very similar how I personally see the virus mandates, is the government's not asking me to sacrifice my firstborn to try to ward off the virus. It's not asking me to imprison people or things like that. Maybe that's how some people are feeling. But if they're just asking me to shelter in place or to limit social distancing or wear a mask, that's not violating my conscience and my duty to God. And that's where I need to submissively obey. Okay? That's my take. Now, for my friends that are more to the right that are afraid this is like a slippery slope and baby steps to losing our freedoms we have in this country, I'm not saying you shouldn't be vigilant, you shouldn't have concerns, but don't fearmonger. The old timers called it borrowing trouble. And Jesus told us, sufficient to the day is the evil thereof. Tomorrow will take care of itself, right? And so we're not to borrow what might happen. Now, we can do research. We can look at trends and make projections. We can put stuff in barns. We can save for retirement. We can have a healthcare plan. But our hope is in the Lord, and we're not to freak out of what might be. We can make plans, but it is the Lord we need to have our hope in. And whether you're on the left or right, whether you have no fear or super fear. I know I sound like Aristotle now. Finding that golden mean, but in the spirit, not through utility or reason or fear. Kate?
Yes, I just wanted to speak to, I think, Valentina, you said you haven't heard or seen anything that really suggests any kind of religious persecution or anything like that. And I would agree for the most part. I don't think like coronavirus is a scheme to, work against the church or anything like that. But there definitely have been some things going on that I see as concerning and potentially going to be a bigger issue. Like, I think it was in California, but there was a church recently that tried to do, like, I don't remember what they called it, like a drive-in service or something, where they all just parked in their cars and like listened to the sermon broadcasted on the radio. No one got out of their car. They're all just sitting in their own cars. And they all got fined. Police came up to every single window and gave them tickets because they were technically congregating in this area, even though they weren't interacting with each other or even sharing the same air. And my sister lives in Japan, near Tokyo, and they've really only just started doing like restrictions and stuff. But one of the things that they put in place is you can't congregate on weekends. Specifically weekends, but not other days of the week. So their church there is trying to figure out how to handle this. So
They
I don't
meet on Mondays, right?
I don't know, I guess, unless you have work during that time or
Unless
yeah.
you're meeting on Sunday, Jesus can't hear you, but I think that's silly.
Yeah. So I don't think
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think there are, like Fred said, I think we need to be cautious and, keep our eyes open. I don't think this necessarily means the church is gonna be taken over by the government, but I have seen some things that
I want to piggyback
make me
on Kate's real quick, specifically with the drive-in church. And I know part of the frustration was it just seems so arbitrary, and I get it. Because I think at the same they weren't allowing drive-in church services. There were still some theaters separating. And so for Christians, you could see how they take this. Let's show these filthy R-rated movies with people in their cars, but we can't sing praises to Jesus in our cars. Persecution. And so I get it. But I think we need to chill out a bit to realize this is new. They're trying, and the same thing, people are bashing Newsom, his list, very big list of what's allowed now that we're opening up in stages. And it's easy to criticize, right, and say, well, why can we do not that? But for heaven's sakes, just saying, could we be gracious? Could we have a kindness towards others? Get the frustration of Christians, but once again, it's not ask you to kill your firstborn or to spit on a shirt or something like that. They simply ask you not to congregate for being. And I think that's something we convictively we may not like, not violating command or
Fred,
conviction.
how long would you be willing to if the government said, like, we can't congregate until we find a cure or vaccine for the virus? Would you be willing to not congregate with your church until that came? Maybe here it's supposed to be like
Probably
years
not
down the
the
road.
right person for that question.
Fred would be living the
Yes.
life. I answer for him.
My obedience is usually congregating. It's a personal choice I do, but it's how I'm obedient. But when I do congregate, it's not my natural position.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? It
But
kind of
I
was.
try empathy. My mission is to be a hermit living off by my own. I assemble with other believers as an act of obedience to God and to Stephen. But
I got this.
okay,
You know,
I do understand some people, they just crave it, and it's so important to their spiritual life and their well-being. Trying to be empathetic with them, but once again, I think it's fine for you to call the government on inconsistencies, but I believe it needs to be done respectfully. It needs to be done in spirit, and it needs to be in love, not in this rage ending our rights. To me, it's how going
Hey,
about
Fred,
it,
your audio is
not
breaking up.
necessarily so much what you believe is. Yeah. I'll stop rambling.
Your audio is breaking up. I couldn't hear every word. But
Any other comments or perspectives?
I have one if somebody else wants to go first, though.
Go ahead.
Mara,
We've
did you
almost
have
done
something?
an hour or so.
No, yeah, I was gonna say something, but you can go ahead, Daria.
I'll make it short. In terms of, well, David, getting back to your point of like not congregating for like a whole year, like no contact whatsoever. Well, we've been dealing with this virus for a number of weeks now. We're figuring out that hopefully social distancing and all that works. I think there could be room for, to allow people to congregate, like maybe every other bench or something, something in place rather than just nothing. So I do agree with you there that there needs to be perhaps more of a balance, and we're learning more. So maybe we can do more. And I think there could be wisdom to be found there and looking at other countries that have dealt with the virus even longer, starting to flatten the curve, starting to reopen, and seeing how their numbers are doing. To point on that, but also in terms of like freedom and liberty, such a weird thing in this country. It almost seems like people want to be able to do whatever they want, but that's not true freedom, is it? We have laws in place to protect other people. In terms of let's say people who don't want to vaccinate their children, even though they could. Let's say they didn't have a condition where they couldn't get vaccinated. That's another issue entirely, and that's another thing. But for people who could, is that really true freedom when it impinges? What?
Yeah, because especially with Bill Gates and others trying to come up with a vaccine, there's a the anti-vaxxers are out in force right now because they're super afraid. It's gone so far that people are claiming Bill Gates' patent for the virus is the number 666, and it's the mark of the beast. Anyone that takes it will basically lose their soul. And I'm thinking, good Lord, people. And then on the other end, I saw a protester the other day who was in trouble for driving churches, and this news person interviewed said, "Aren't you concerned about the government or disease?" And the person was like, "My vaccine." It's like, please stop.
Oh my gosh.
Please stop.
Oh my gosh.
Go ahead, Daria.
Yeah, no, that whole thing is it's crazy. But the thing is, like, there are people like that who exist, and it goes for all kinds of walks of life. But really allowing people to do whatever they wish in the name of civil liberty and freedom is not true freedom, I think. Because in the example of anti-vaxxers, there have been diseases that have been coming back, like measles. Now, measles is not deadly, but apparently it can reset your immune system, I heard, and then you can possibly get things that you haven't vaccinated for again. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know that for sure, but I heard that somewhere, right? From someone who studies
birth
it.
defects.
Yeah,
Measles,
no.
If you get it when you're pregnant, with severe birth defects to your unborn child,
Exactly.
There's a lot of problems.
Yeah, you see, this is a good example because people who say like I shouldn't have to vaccinate my children. This is a free country. I should be able to do what I want. Their freedoms are actually limiting the freedoms of others, and I don't consider that true freedom when your example of like I want to do whatever I want in the name of freedom impinges on somebody else's well-being and their freedom to health or whatever. Like there's a reason we don't allow like heroin as a legal drug. Marijuana, sure. That one's actually relatively harmless as long as your brain's fully developed and it's really your choice. But
It was illegal in California within 5 years ago, and now it's essential.
exactly,
It cracks me
it
up
was
how times
really
change.
racist thing where it was outlawed. But that's a long time ago and involves Nixon, and let's not go there. But the
And
idea
it's a
is
different topic. We can do later.
different topic. Oh Lord. Go watch the Adam Ruins Everything episode on Adam Ruins Drugs. It's great. But anyway, what I was trying to say is there's a reason we don't allow like heroin or cocaine or hard drugs, because it's better for them, you know, like wearing a helmet. It protects you. The laws are not there to limit your freedom to do whatever you want. It's to protect you, really. There are reasons we have boundaries. Boundaries are healthy.
And you're definitely coming from the left.
I am a communist. Yay. Because I was born there in Russia and actually I'm a spy. Burn the bitch.
But just like when we were doing Aristotelian golden means, right? The idea of freedom, plot it like that. But Aristotelians, they're Christians. We have the Holy Spirit. That Holy Spirit, we can navigate, reckon
Your audio is going out.
with this, we can avoid wrecking the day. And I want us to move beyond left or right, beyond Democrat or Republican, to what would the Spirit have us do? And that may look very, but I think that Spirit piece, whether you're for the freedom or the safety, I think we can be for either of those positions in love and care for others. And loving others, so that's protecting their freedoms or protecting their safety. And how can we communicate that love of Christ for them? And I think that's here. We're allowed to disagree, different convictions, that's love and the Spirit. Anyone else right in this recording? Okay, I'm going to shut this off. Thanks for participating. And it was so kind and loving.
Thank you.
I had one more student going to comment.
Oh, I was just gonna say I agree with all of you in your own sense. And I agree with what Daria said about freedom and you know and what Kate said about the churches that we're gathering. I find myself in the middle, and I just kind of look at this like kind of what I forgot he said about the antibody test. And the test that could possibly be a pre-vaccine for those who are not sick, and then they can go out into the world to prevent the COVID-19 from actually affecting them. And then
Right.
It can continue to keep our economy growing and thriving. But then on the other hand, I look and I see, for example, Georgia. They opened part of their economy, and then people were lining up for Jordans, and 40% were Jordan the shoe. Okay, people were at a mall, lining up for a shoe, not doing social distancing, not wearing masks, and it just increased to 40%. That's where I'm just like, come on, like we were opening up our economy, and then we choose to go shop for Jordans. Like I find myself getting frustrated and being like, okay, at the other side of the spectrum, I get it. We need to open up our economy. America wants to open up again. But then you see the choices that are being made, and I'm just like, no, what is happening? Like, we're that a materialistic society that, we're gonna, and I see it. I know we are. I 100% know we are. But
can I get
and yeah, it's just like it's frustrating me, and my bias is towards I'm more realistic, and that can be I think one of my faults is that I'm more realistic, and I know people want the economy open so they can go shopping. Like in Europe, the Louis Vuitton store, there was a line around the building for people to go buy a bag.
Those bags are ugly anyway.
Yeah, I'm just like, I get our civil liberties, I get the economy needs to go back to work, but it's not to line up at their favorite restaurant or at the bookstore or to go to church. Like, there's a few churches that have actually been congregating and getting fines in Ohio, Mississippi, Massachusetts. Like, it's things like that I'm like, yes, I get it. I 100% get that part, but I don't get the other part. And I get so frustrated because I'm just like, I want the economy to open. I want us to be safe and practice social distancing, but I don't have faith in those types of standards that people will uphold. I mean, just the other day, yeah, it's just like the other day, like in Santee, the guy with the mask, the Ku Klux Klan mask.
Yeah, he was wearing a Klan hood in
yeah,
Santee.
it's just like it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating, and
I thought Klan was fine, and here we go right back.
Yeah, I've gone to that Vons so many times, and I've never seen such a disgusting appearance of someone using that, and it's so frustrating. And I just want to say, like I said, I agree with a lot of, and even what Valentina said about how we have to have empathy. I like what Daria said about she's able, she's not in that position, and neither am I. I'm still getting money in. My husband's a police officer. He's still getting paid, and we're okay. But I do, my brother, he's unemployed, and he had a labor job, and his wife's unemployed, and we're able to help them, which thank God.
Yes.
And like someone said earlier about everything is temporary, and as Christians we know this. We know everything is temporary, but the one thing that is not is God. God is forever, and I really I love that about myself, and knowing that I'm a Christian and my faith is never temporary. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of people are looking at it from the left or the right, and I know that it's, as a Christian, it's everlasting in his faith. So
thank you, Maura. All right, well, let's wrap up. I just want to commend you all to be able to have a conversation like this with very different perspectives, points of views, but it in a loving way. And I thought everyone did a fine job of listening to the other. So nice modeling.